And hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and truly the best way to support us so we can continue bringing you more dramatic stories every week. Your support means the world to us. And before we start, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The story begins on a gray Tuesday morning inside the towering headquarters of Westbridge Dynamics, a place where the air smelled of polished marble, expensive perfume, and quiet ambition. Employees rushed through the lobby with coffee cups and folders pressed to their chests, but no one noticed the man pushing a cleaning cart across the glossy floor. His name was Thomas Reed, 50 years old, quiet, unnoticed, invisible by design. His Navy janitor uniform was a little faded at the seams, and his knuckles were red from years of scrubbing floors, polishing brass rails, and emptying trash bins long after everyone else went home. Yet today, something was different. His breath carried a weight that did not belong to a janitor. Hidden deep inside the pocket of his uniform was a sealed envelope that could change everything. Upstairs, in the executive boardroom, the company's young CEO, Alexandra Hayes, sat alone at the massive oak table, tapping a contract with the edge of her pen. Her family's empire was slipping from her hands, and the board threatened to force her into an arranged engagement with a business partner to preserve the company image. The thought made her stomach twist. She needed a husband on paper, fast, someone with no ties to rival corporations, no hidden motives, no connection to her world of wealth and power. Someone who could disappear into the background and protect her reputation while she fought to regain control of her life. And then, the door opened. Thomas stepped in quietly, holding a stack of documents for the payroll department, his posture humble, his eyes lowered. Alexandra almost waved him away, until one detail made her freeze. On the corner of the stack, she saw the signature that had recently caused every board member to whisper in confusion. The signature approving all payroll checks. Thomas Reed, the janitor. Her eyes lifted to him slowly, studying the calm, weathered face of a man who looked like he had spent his entire life being undervalued. You, she said, her voice shaking with equal parts disbelief and curiosity. You signed the paychecks? Thomas nodded once, barely looking up. Yes, ma'am. Your father arranged it years ago. He wanted someone the board could not manipulate handling employee pay, someone they would overlook. Alexandra leaned back, stunned. Her father, the late founder, had been a master strategist, and he had hidden a man with real authority behind a mop and a uniform. Suddenly, an idea struck her. A wild, impossible, completely irrational idea. But it was also her only way out. Thomas, she said quietly, I need your help. He blinked, confused. Alexandra stood, walked around the table, and held out the contract she had been agonizing over. Marry me, she said, her tone steady but her eyes full of fear she refused to show. Thomas froze, his hand tightening on the cleaning cart handle. Ma'am, I am your janitor. I know exactly who you are, she replied, her voice firming. And that is why you are the only person I can trust. The room fell silent, the kind of silence that changes a life forever. And that was the moment the janitor who signed the paychecks realized he was being asked to become the husband of one of the most powerful women in the state. Even he did not know whether to run from her or save her. Stay tuned for what happens next. After a long pause, Thomas finally spoke, his voice a low murmur, almost unsure of what he was hearing. You want me to marry you? You're the CEO of this company, and I'm just a janitor. Alexandra's gaze didn't waver. Her expression was firm, yet there was something vulnerable beneath the surface. Yes, she said, her voice steady. I need a husband for business purposes, someone with no ties, no alliances, someone they can't manipulate. It's the only way I can stay in control of this company and my future. And you're the only person I trust. The words hung in the air, thick with the weight of the situation. Thomas felt his heart beat faster. It wasn't just the shock of her proposition. It was the fact that she was serious. I don't know what to say, he muttered, glancing down at the floor, his mind spinning. This is all so sudden. Alexandra stepped closer, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor, a sound that made the air feel even heavier. I know it's a lot to ask, she said, her voice softening, almost pleading now. But if you help me, I'll make sure you're taken care of. I'll make sure your family is taken care of. This is not just about the company. It's about survival. You've seen what they've done to me. They want to take everything away. I need to do this, and I can't do it alone. Thomas swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. His family, his daughter, had always been his top priority. His hands, calloused from years of hard labor, trembled as he clenched them into fists at his sides. He had always played by the rules, kept his head down, and done his work without question. But this was different. The offer was a lifeline, a chance to change everything for his daughter, who was fighting a battle of her own, one he didn't know how to win without more money, more connections. I'm not sure this is the right thing to do, he finally said, his voice quieter now, almost a whisper. Alexandra paused, then took a step back, her gaze softening. I understand. It's a lot to ask, Thomas. But think about what you could have, what we could do together. There was a long pause between them. Thomas stared at the floor, lost in his thoughts. He had always wanted more for his daughter. He had always wanted to give her a better life than the one he had, but it never seemed possible. And now, here was a chance, albeit an unexpected one, to step into a world of unimaginable wealth, power, and influence. I'll need time to think, Thomas said, his voice filled with uncertainty, but also a spark of something else. Hope, perhaps. Alexandra nodded, giving him space to process. She knew this wasn't an easy decision. For her, it wasn't just a contract. It was her last chance to reclaim her life. Take all the time you need, she said quietly. But I need an answer soon. The board is pushing me into a corner, and I can't let them win. The tension in the room was palpable as Thomas turned to leave, his mind racing with questions. Would he really agree to this? Was he ready to enter a world he knew nothing about? And more importantly, could he protect the people he loved in the process? As he stepped back into the elevator, the doors closed with a soft chime, sealing him inside with his thoughts. The weight of the decision was heavier now than it had ever been. What was he supposed to do next? His life had been so small, so ordinary, and now it felt as though he was standing on the precipice of something much bigger. He had always prided himself on being invisible, on working behind the scenes, unnoticed and unimportant. But now, everything was different. He wasn't just a janitor anymore. He wasn't just a background player. Now he was part of something much larger. But was it a world he truly wanted to be part of? The elevator doors opened, and Thomas stepped out, his mind still in turmoil. He walked down the long corridor, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The building was still, almost eerily quiet, as if holding its breath, waiting for the decision he would make. But for Thomas, the decision was much more than just a contract or a marriage. It was a crossroads in his life, and whatever path he chose would change everything. But for better or worse. Only time would tell. Days passed, and the weight of the decision hung over Thomas like a thick fog. Each morning, he awoke with the thought of Alexandra's proposition lingering in his mind. He had never imagined his life could be so complicated, yet here he was, standing at a crossroads he never saw coming. On the one hand, he could continue his quiet life as a janitor, invisible and unnoticed. But on the other, there was the offer, the chance to change his life and his daughter's life forever. It was a decision he couldn't ignore. He couldn't run from it. Yet he wasn't sure if he was ready to step into that world. The world of power, wealth, and everything that came with it. He needed to think, but the days were slipping away, and he knew time was running out. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about his daughter, Lily. Her medical bills were piling up, and despite his best efforts, he couldn't give her the life she deserved. It wasn't fair. She deserved more than this. The thought of her suffering because of his inability to provide weighed on him like a stone in his chest. That night, after another long day of cleaning the corporate offices, Thomas sat in his small apartment, staring at a crumpled letter on the kitchen table. It was the final medical notice for Lily's treatment. He couldn't pay it. He couldn't give her the care she needed. He thought back to the offer Alexandra made, to the way she had looked at him, her eyes pleading for him to help her, to marry her, to save her from the mess her life had become. But what if it wasn't just about money? What if there was something more to this? His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. He opened it to find a package sitting on the doormat, unmarked and wrapped in plain brown paper. As he picked it up, his heart skipped a beat. Inside was an envelope with Alexandra's handwriting. He hesitated, staring at it for a moment, before opening it carefully. Inside was a check. A large check. The kind of check that could cover all of Lily's medical bills, with more left over for whatever else he needed. But it wasn't just the money that took his breath away. It was the letter that accompanied it. Thomas, I know you are thinking this is just about the company, but I want you to understand that it's not. It's about giving both of us a chance at something better. Something real. I am offering you this because I believe you deserve more than what life has given you. Take it, or leave it. The choice is yours. His hands trembled as he read the letter again. The amount of money in that envelope was more than he had ever dreamed of. It could change everything for Lily. It could change everything for him. He placed the letter down, staring at the check in silence. This was it. This was the moment that would determine the rest of his life. Could he really go through with it? Could he marry a woman he barely knew? A woman who had power and wealth beyond anything he could comprehend? And yet, what if it was the only way to give his daughter the future she deserved? He knew he had to make a choice, and he couldn't afford to waste any more time. With a heavy heart, he picked up the phone and dialed the number that would change everything. The phone rang twice before Alexandra's voice answered. Hello, Thomas. There was a pause before he spoke. I've thought about it, he said, his voice steady, despite the turmoil inside. I'll do it. I'll marry you. Alexandra's voice softened, and for the first time, there was a hint of relief. You will? She asked, her voice almost a whisper. Yes, he replied, his decision made. But I need you to understand, this isn't just about money or the company. It's about something more. I need to know that you're not just doing this for convenience. I need to know that we're in this together. There was a brief silence before she answered, her voice firm but with a sense of tenderness. We're in this together, Thomas. I promise you that. With those words, Thomas felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He didn't know what the future would hold, but at that moment, he made a vow to himself. No matter what happened, he would protect his daughter, and he would make sure that, even in a world of power and wealth, love could still have a place. The days following his decision felt like a blur. Thomas spent the next few days in a fog, his mind constantly shifting between doubt and resolve. The weight of the promise he made to Alexandra was heavy, but the thought of his daughter, Lily, kept him moving forward. He had agreed to the marriage, but the reality of what he was about to do was slowly sinking in. He had lived his whole life in the shadows, cleaning up after the powerful, the rich, and the influential, but now he was stepping into that world, a world that felt so foreign to him. That morning, he walked into the building, his heart pounding in his chest as he made his way to Alexandra's office. He had been here countless times before, but this time, everything was different. As he approached her door, he paused for a moment, taking a deep breath before knocking. Desk, papers scattered around her, a soft light from the window casting a glow on her face. She looked up when he entered, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. He could see a flicker of relief in her eyes, but there was also a hint of apprehension. Thomas, she said, standing up to greet him. I'm glad you came. I said I would. He replied, his voice steady but his heart racing. He walked into the room and stopped just a few feet away from her, unsure of what to do next. There was a moment of silence before she spoke again. I know this isn't easy, she said, her voice soft but firm. But we have to make this official now. The paperwork is ready. The ceremony will be small, just a few people. I know it's a lot to ask, but I believe this is the right choice for both of us. Thomas nodded, swallowing the lump that had formed in his throat. It felt surreal, standing there in front of the woman who had been a stranger just days ago, now his fiancée. He had agreed to marry her, but part of him still couldn't believe it was really happening. I understand, he said quietly, but I need you to know that I'm doing this for Lily, for her future. I don't want anyone to think this is about anything else. Alexandra's expression softened, and she stepped closer to him, her voice gentle. I understand, Thomas. And I promise you, this isn't just about business. I need you in my life for more than just the company. But I also need to keep up appearances for the board. This marriage is part of that, but it's not all of it. He looked at her, his eyes searching hers for any sign of doubt. But all he saw was sincerity. Okay, he said after a moment. Let's do it. For Lily. Alexandra smiled then, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. Thank you, she said. I know this won't be easy, but I promise you, we'll figure it out together. The relief in her voice made him feel like he had made the right choice, even if he wasn't entirely sure what would come next. Over the next few days, everything moved quickly. Thomas found himself sitting at a long conference table with Alexandra and her lawyer, signing papers that would make the marriage official. It was surreal, the stack of legal documents that outlined the terms of their marriage. He was signing his life away on paper, but it wasn't just about him anymore. It was about Lily. He had to remind himself of that as he signed each page. As the papers were finalized, Alexandra turned to him with a smile. "It's done," she said. "Now, we just have to keep up appearances." Thomas couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. He had signed a contract, yes, but there was no turning back now. He was in it for the long haul, whether he was ready or not. "I'll do my part," he said, his voice steady. "I just hope we can make this work." Alexandra nodded, her expression softening. "We will," she said firmly. "We'll make it work." Later that day, they stood side by side in front of a small group of their closest colleagues at a private ceremony in a quiet corner of the office. It was a simple affair, nothing like the extravagant weddings that Alexandra had once envisioned for herself. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that they were married. Officially. The ring on Thomas's finger felt heavy, but it was a symbol of the promise he had made. The promise to do whatever it took to protect his daughter and, in the process, find a place in this world that had once seemed so distant. Alexandra looked at him with a warmth in her eyes, a flicker of something that seemed more real than he had expected. Maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. "Congratulations," one of the board members said, offering a polite smile as they shook hands with the newly married couple. It was awkward, but there was no going back now. Thomas couldn't help but feel a strange mix of fear and hope. He had just entered a world where nothing was as simple as it seemed. But he was determined to make it work. For his daughter, and for whatever future he and Alexandra could create together. The days following their quiet, private ceremony were filled with a tense stillness. Thomas sat at his small desk in the janitor's office, his mind swirling with 1,000 thoughts. His wedding ring, now a permanent fixture on his finger, felt like both a weight and a reminder of the strange, unexpected reality he had entered. He had married Alexandra Hayes, the powerful CEO, not for love, but out of necessity, out of his need to protect his daughter, Lily, and give her a future that was slipping away. But as he adjusted to this new, strange life, he couldn't help but feel the distance between him and Alexandra grow. At work, no one seemed to notice the change, except for the occasional, polite nod from colleagues. But everything felt different. Alexandra was still the CEO, running the company with a sharp focus and determination. Meanwhile, Thomas had taken on the role of a shadow, moving through the office unnoticed, just as he had before. But now, the stakes were higher. Now, he wasn't just a janitor. He was a husband, a man with a life and future tied to the most powerful woman in the room. It was a strange and uncomfortable feeling. Late one afternoon, Alexandra asked him to meet her in her office. "Thomas," she began, her voice softer than usual, "I need to talk to you." He hesitated at the door before entering. She motioned for him to sit, a slight frown on her face. He sat down cautiously, unsure of what this conversation might bring. "I know this hasn't been easy for you," she said after a moment, her eyes meeting his. "You're not just here to be my husband on paper. You're part of this now, and I need you to understand the gravity of that." Thomas nodded, swallowing the unease rising in his chest. "I understand," he said, his voice steady. But inside, his heart raced. "I've been doing some thinking," she continued. "The board is pushing for more transparency, more involvement from you. I need you to start taking a more active role in the company. Not just as my husband, but as someone who has a say in how things run." The words hung in the air, heavy with expectation. Thomas had never been a part of anything like this. He was used to staying in the background, cleaning the floors, and doing the tasks no one else wanted to do. But now, he was being asked to step into a world he had never understood. "What exactly do you mean?" he asked, his voice tight with uncertainty. Alexandra leaned forward, her expression serious. "I need you to start making decisions. I need you to understand the company's financials, its operations. I want you to attend board meetings. You're not just a figurehead anymore, Thomas. This is real, and I need you to show the board that you're in charge, that you can make decisions." His mind raced as he tried to process what she was saying. He had never been involved in the business side of things, let alone in decision-making at the level Alexandra was talking about. But I'm not qualified, he said, his voice cracking with the weight of his insecurity. I've never done anything like this. I don't know the first thing about business. Alexandra's gaze softened. I know it's a lot to ask, but you're not alone in this, Thomas. I'll help you. I'll teach you. You've already proven you have the strength to handle tough situations. This is just the next step. There was a long silence between them. Thomas's heart was pounding, but something inside him stirred. Was this what he had signed up for? Was this the life he had promised himself, the life he had promised Lily? He had agreed to this marriage for her, but now he was being asked to play a part he wasn't sure he could fulfill. I'll try, he said, finally, his voice low but determined. I'll try to be what you need me to be. Alexandra nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips. That's all I ask, she said softly. Just try. We'll do this together. As he left her office that afternoon, the weight of her words stayed with him. He had been thrust into a world of power, money, and influence, and now, more than ever, he felt like an outsider. But something had changed in him. He was no longer just a janitor, hiding in the background. He was a man with a purpose, even if he wasn't sure what that purpose was yet. Later that week, he attended his first board meeting. He walked into the room, his heart pounding in his chest, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the silence. The board members sat around the large conference table, all eyes on him as he took a seat beside Alexandra. Mr. Reed, one of the board members said, his tone formal but tinged with curiosity. I trust you've been briefed on the company's current financial status? Thomas nodded, trying to steady his breathing. Yes, he said, his voice steady, though his hands were shaking beneath the table. I've reviewed the documents. The room fell silent as the discussion began, but Thomas felt every word, every decision, like a weight pressing down on him. He wasn't just a spectator anymore. He was part of the conversation. And as the meeting continued, he realized that this wasn't just a contract, a marriage of convenience. It was a partnership, one that would either break him or make him stronger. And for the first time, he wasn't sure which path he would take. The days following his first board meeting were both exhausting and exhilarating. Thomas felt as though his life had shifted into a higher gear, one that was much faster and much more intense than anything he had known before. At first, the meetings were overwhelming. Financial terms, projections, and industry jargon swirled around him like a storm. But over time, with Alexandra's patient guidance, he started to understand. He began to see the company's inner workings, the power dynamics, and most importantly, the responsibility that came with being a part of it all. As the days passed, he found himself more engaged, more present in these discussions. It was still a world of luxury and power, one he didn't quite belong to. But the more he learned, the more he realized that this world wasn't as intimidating as it had seemed at first. What scared him the most was not the business side, but his growing feelings toward Alexandra. The woman he had married for practical reasons was now becoming more real to him than he had expected. They spent long hours together, working on projects, strategizing with the board. Alexandra was driven, brilliant, and every bit the powerful CEO he had first seen. But when the office cleared and the quiet moments arrived, he saw a different side of her, vulnerable, human, and tired. She was doing this all alone, despite the mask of control she wore. One evening, after another intense day of meetings, Alexandra invited him to join her for dinner in the office. It's just us tonight, she said, her voice softer than usual. I thought we could go over some of the proposals. I need your thoughts. As they sat across from each other at the long, polished conference table, Thomas noticed how the dim light softened the lines of her face, how she appeared less like the powerful CEO and more like a woman who was fighting a personal battle. You've been doing great, she said, her voice sincere. I know this isn't easy for you. Thomas smiled faintly, shaking his head. It's not as hard as I thought, he admitted. It's just different. I'm used to being in the background. Now, I feel like I'm in the middle of everything. Alexandra met his gaze, her eyes searching his for something. You are in the middle of everything now, Thomas. And I think you're doing a great job. You don't give yourself enough credit. There was a pause before he spoke again, his voice quieter this time. Why did you ask me to do this? I mean, I never imagined myself in this position, married to you, being part of this company. It's not what I thought my life would look like. Alexandra seemed to hesitate for a moment, her hands resting on the table. "I asked you because you're different," she said finally. "I needed someone who wasn't part of this world, someone who could see things from a different perspective. I needed you to see the company for what it really is. And now, I think I'm starting to see you for who you really are." Thomas swallowed hard, unsure of how to respond. His emotions were tangled, more complicated than he had anticipated. They had started this marriage as a business arrangement, two people thrown together by necessity, but now he found himself questioning everything. Was there something more between them? Was he really ready to cross that line? Before he could say anything, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway outside, signaling the return of the rest of the team. They both turned their attention to the door, and with it, the moment between them faded. But as the team entered, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, something that wasn't just about business anymore. Over the next few weeks, Thomas continued to work closely with Alexandra. They attended more board meetings, and he became more confident in his role. But despite their growing professional partnership, the line between them remained unclear. At work, they were colleagues, CEO and husband. Outside of work, they were still strangers, two people who had entered into a marriage of convenience. One evening, as they sat together after a long day, Alexandra surprised him. "Thomas," she said, looking at him with a calm, serious expression, "I need you to trust me. Everything we're doing, was never just about business. I know it was for you at first, but for me, this has always been more." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time, Thomas felt a flicker of something deep within him. He realized he had been holding back, keeping his emotions locked away, afraid of what crossing that line might mean. But in that moment, he saw Alexandra in a new light, someone who was just as lost in this situation as he was. She had been putting up walls, just like he had. "I'm not sure what you mean," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What are we doing, Alexandra?" She smiled faintly, her eyes softening. "I don't know," she admitted. "But maybe we can figure that out together." For the first time since their wedding, Thomas felt the shift in their relationship. They were no longer just two people playing roles in a business arrangement. They were beginning to understand each other, to see each other for who they really were. And in that moment, Thomas realized that their marriage, the one that had started as a contract, was slowly becoming something real. Something he wasn't sure he was ready for, but something he was willing to explore. Whatever it was, he knew one thing for certain. It was no longer just about business. Weeks passed, and the tension between Thomas and Alexandra continued to build. The more they worked together, the more their professional relationship began to blur into something else. They had started their marriage with clear boundaries, both knowing that their union was a business arrangement. But now, those lines were starting to fade. Thomas found himself thinking about her more than he had ever expected. Her calm demeanor, her sharp intelligence, and even the small moments of vulnerability she showed when the weight of the world seemed too much for her to bear. These things began to draw him in. One evening, after a particularly challenging board meeting, Alexandra asked him to stay late to go over some documents. As they sat in her office, the atmosphere felt heavier than usual, the silence between them thick with unspoken words. "Thomas," Alexandra said, breaking the silence, "I need to talk to you." He looked up from the stack of papers, surprised by the serious tone in her voice. "What's going on?" he asked, his heart picking up speed. She hesitated for a moment, her fingers tapping nervously on the edge of her desk. "I've been thinking a lot about us," she said, her eyes meeting his. "About our situation." Thomas's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" he asked quietly, unsure of what to expect. "I know we started this marriage for practical reasons," she continued, her voice soft but steady. "But I can't ignore the fact that something is changing. I'm starting to feel things that I didn't expect to feel." Thomas felt a knot form in his stomach. He had been feeling it too. Something was changing. But he wasn't sure if it was real or just the result of their close working relationship. "Alexandra," he said slowly, "I don't know if I'm ready for this. We agreed this was just a contract, a way to protect each other. But now, it feels like there's more to it. I don't want to mess things up, especially with everything going on." She sighed, standing up from her desk and walking toward the window. "I don't know what this is either, Thomas," she said, her voice tinged with frustration. "But I can't pretend that it's just a business arrangement anymore. I care about you." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Thomas swallowed hard, trying to process what she had just said. He had never imagined that their marriage would lead to this. Feelings that were becoming more complicated with each passing day. "I care about you too," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. There was a long silence between them, the air thick with the weight of their unspoken feelings. Then, finally, Alexandra turned to face him, her eyes filled with something deeper than he had ever seen before. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice softer this time. Thomas stood up and took a step toward her, his mind racing. He had never been one to jump into emotions, never been one to let his guard down. But something about this, something about her, was different. He reached out, his hand brushing against hers. "I don't know," he said quietly, "but maybe we can figure it out together." Alexandra smiled, a mixture of relief and uncertainty in her eyes. "Maybe we can." The next few days were filled with a new, quiet understanding between them. They continued to work together, side by side. But now there was an unspoken bond that neither could ignore. Their relationship had shifted, and although they both tried to keep things professional, the undercurrent of something more was undeniable. As they attended another board meeting together, Thomas could feel the eyes of the other board members on them. There was no longer any pretense. Everyone could see that something had changed. But for the first time, Thomas felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. With Alexandra by his side, he was no longer the invisible janitor. He was a partner, a man with a purpose. And though he still didn't know where their relationship would go, he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't ready to let her go. Not now. Not ever. The days after their quiet conversation in Alexandra's office were filled with an unspoken understanding. The air between Thomas and her had shifted, and though they continued their daily routine at the office, something had changed. There were subtle moments, a lingering glance, a quiet touch, that spoke volumes without saying a word. It was as if they had crossed a line, but neither of them was sure where that line led. They still maintained their professional distance in public, but behind closed doors, there was something more, something neither of them had expected. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Alexandra asked Thomas to meet her at a private dinner event hosted by one of the company's partners. "It's important, Thomas," she had said. "We need to show the board that we are a united front. But I also want you to be there with me, not just as my husband, but as a partner." When Thomas walked into the grand ballroom, the elegant decor and the murmurs of the crowd felt far removed from the quiet world he had always known. He adjusted his tie, trying to shake off the sense of discomfort. He wasn't used to this kind of attention, and the polished, powerful crowd seemed almost intimidating. But as he looked over at Alexandra across the room, he saw her standing tall, her presence commanding attention. She caught his eye and smiled, and suddenly, all his nerves seemed to fade. She wasn't just the CEO in this moment. She was his partner, and in that instant, he realized that they were truly in this together. Alexandra walked over to him, her steps confident, the soft rustle of her dress the only sound between them. She placed her hand gently on his arm, and as they walked through the crowd, her hand never left his. "I'm glad you're here," she said softly, looking up at him with a warmth he hadn't noticed before. The evening unfolded smoothly, filled with small talk and polite exchanges, but throughout it all, Thomas and Alexandra stood side by side. Every time a board member or partner approached them, they stood as a team, their connection evident in the way they communicated, small gestures, knowing glances. It was clear that their partnership was growing stronger, but there was still an underlying tension. The question remained, was this just for show, or was it becoming something more? Later in the evening, as the event began to wind down, Alexandra led him to a quiet corner of the ballroom. The music played softly in the background, and the crowd had thinned out. They stood together in silence for a moment, the only sounds between them the soft clinking of glasses and distant laughter. "Thomas," Alexandra began, her voice low, almost hesitant. "I know this isn't what we planned. This marriage, this partnership, it wasn't supposed to be real. But lately, I've started to wonder if it's becoming something more. For both of us." Thomas looked at her, his heart beating faster than it should. He had tried to ignore the feelings that were slowly growing between them, but now, in this quiet moment, he couldn't deny them any longer. "Alexandra," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I've been feeling the same way. I don't know what this is, but it feels real. And for the first time in a long time, I'm starting to think that maybe this could work." that maybe we can make it work. Alexandra's eyes softened, and she took a step closer, her hand resting lightly on his chest. I want to believe that too, she said. But I'm scared. Scared that if we let go of the boundaries we set, we might lose control of everything. Of the company, of our lives, of each other. Thomas reached out and took her hand, his grip firm yet gentle. We don't have to have all the answers right now, he said, his voice steady. But we can figure it out. Together. For the first time, Alexandra smiled with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. It was a smile that spoke of possibilities, of a future neither of them could have predicted. As the evening drew to a close, they left the ballroom side by side, no longer just a CEO and her husband, but two people who had started to see each other in a new light. Their relationship, once rooted in necessity, was now beginning to take shape into something neither of them could have anticipated. But the path ahead was still uncertain, and both of them knew it. The challenges were far from over, but for the first time, they were ready to face them, not just as partners in business, but as partners in life. As the weeks passed, Thomas and Alexandra found themselves navigating new territory, both in their professional and personal lives. The lines between business partners and something more blurred as they spent more time together, both at the office and outside of it. They had been through so much together, and the connection between them was undeniable. The power struggles in the boardroom became easier to handle, and Thomas, once unsure and out of place, now sat confidently at the table, his voice being heard. It was no longer just about him being Alexandra's husband or the janitor who had been thrust into a world of wealth and power. He had become a trusted advisor, a key player in the company's future. And as their professional bond grew, so did their personal one. They shared quiet dinners in the office, long walks through the city, and moments of understanding that went beyond words. One evening, after another successful board meeting, Thomas and Alexandra found themselves alone on the rooftop of the building, looking out over the city. The lights of the skyline shimmered in the distance, and for the first time, the weight of the world didn't feel so heavy. Alexandra leaned against the railing, her eyes on the horizon. You know, when we first started this, she said, her voice soft, I didn't think it would work. I thought I was just doing what I had to do to survive. Thomas stood beside her, his hands in his pockets. I thought the same, he said, his voice steady. But now, it feels different. I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm living. They stood in silence for a moment, the city stretching out before them. The uncertainty that had once consumed them both seemed to fade as they realized how far they had come. I never expected this, Alexandra continued, her voice quieter now. I never expected to feel like this. To feel like I was actually part of something, not just the person who had to hold everything together. Thomas turned to her, his eyes softening. We're in this together, he said, stepping closer. And we're going to make it work. No matter what. Alexandra looked up at him, her expression a mix of hope and something deeper, something more vulnerable than she had ever shown before. I think I've been afraid to admit that for a long time, she said. But I'm not afraid anymore. Thomas reached out, taking her hand in his, the connection between them electric. We'll figure it out, he said. Together. And in that moment, standing on the rooftop with the city stretching out before them, they both realized that they had found something more than they ever expected. A partnership built on trust, respect, and the kind of love that had grown slowly but surely. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that was all that mattered. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, they both felt ready to face it, side by side. The story that had begun with a business arrangement had transformed into something that neither of them could have predicted. What started as a deal for survival had turned into a journey of discovery, of growth, and of love. Together, they were no longer just two people thrown together by circumstance. They were a team, and no matter what came next, they knew they were ready for it. I'm glad I met you, Alexandra said, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas smiled, his eyes reflecting the same warmth. I'm glad I met you too. They stood there together, watching the world below them, ready to face whatever came next, together.